So I welcome you all at a research presentation hosted by a Center of Wisdom in Leadership at SPJMR. It's a pioneering initiative that seeks to transform leadership development by integrating value-based growth with a timeless wisdom tradition from both East and West. Aligned with SPJMR's mission of fostering responsible leadership, CWL enriches conventional corporate learning approaches through research, experiential program, and thought leadership by drawing from sources such as Vedanta, Yoga, Sikhism, and Buddhism. CWL explores the role of wisdom in leadership across diverse domains, including history, politics, governance, while contributing to a global network of scholars and practitioners committed to fostering deeper and more purposeful leadership. Today, we have with us Professor Abhoy Ojha. So Professor Ojha started teaching in University of Alberta, Edmonton, Canada during the doctoral program prior to joining IIMB. He was an assistant professor at Laushan University, Canada. He worked as an engineer in Bombay Division of Oil and Natural Gas Commission before pursuing doctoral studies in management. Apart from his corporate experience, he has rich teaching and research experience. He has published in reputed journals like Journal of Business Research, IMB Management Review, South Asian Journal of Human Resource Management, Journal of Human Values. Today, he will be deliberating on Gandhian model of trusteeship. So, with this, I welcome Professor Ojha and everyone. So, I would request Professor Ojha to uh, deliberate and give us his knowledge and share his knowledge about the presentation. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Banajit, and namaste to all who are attending. Today, I will, as the title suggests, I will talk about this topic, Can the Subaltern Think? Reviving Mahatma Gandhi's concept of trusteeship. This, I'll kind of try to speak around 40-45 minutes, and after that, I will answer questions that might come up. So, I'm going to start with this. Have any of you heard or read the statement below? जहां खड़े होते हैं लाइन वहीं से शुरू होती है. Sort of people who don't understand the Devanagari script, it's written in the English script here, and English translation is the line starts from wherever I stand, and this is from the movie Kalia, which had starring Amitabh Bachchan and released in 1981. I've tried to share this with others, and most people remember it as a statement made by Amitabh Bachchan. Okay, but actually, this statement was made by some other character before Amitabh Bachchan repeats that statement. And so, you can watch this clip on YouTube. I cannot show you the YouTube here, but I'll describe what is the scene here. The scene is there's a prisoner with disability played by the character Ram Sethi, who's at the head of the line at a prison in a prison food counter, and he's serving himself. And there's another person called Michael, played by Bob Christo. He's the one who says that jis thali mein tumne whatever haath rakhe hai, wo meri hai. So when the character Ram Sethi objects, Michael tells him that okay, jahan hum khade hote hain, line wahin se shuru hoti hai. Essentially, Michael asserts himself that you might have been in line before me. That doesn't matter because the line starts from where I start. So all the people who are in line behind the prisoner with disability just look at two faces and they realize who's calling the shots, and they all get in line behind Michael. Then that's the time when Amitabh Bachchan steps in and he kind of snatches the plate away from Michael and says, "Is thali par tumhara naam nahi," whatever. And ultimately, he repeats that statement, jahan hum khade hote hain, line wahin se shuru hoti hai. Now, why do I tell this story? Essentially, for too long, and I picked this video clip because for whatever reasons, I don't know whether that was the intention of the movie. It's a white man who's pushing away a brown man and saying, "Listen, I'm at the lead, and you look up to me. I might not have come to the line first, but I'm the one who decides what is the head of the line. And you needed an Amitabh Bachchan character, Kallu, who comes and challenges him. So I'm taking that spirit here and say it's time for Indian scholars to assert themselves. Okay, this whole idea of Eurocentric universalism needs to be challenged. Of course, I think, therefore I am is attributed to Descartes, and of course Minolo has tried to have a play on that. He says we should move to I am where I do and I think. Essentially, it's important for Indian scholars to kind of engage with the context they are in and start thinking and theorizing for their context, and not necessarily continue to borrow concepts or theories from the West. They should be open to influence and open to understanding from the West. And yet, if we continue to just be mere copycats, I think we'll be doing a disservice to our scholarship and to the society that we live in. So this is again Gandhi in Hind Swaraj says that it is Swaraj when we learn to rule ourselves. One second. Let me minimize this. It is Swaraj when we learn to rule ourselves. It is therefore in the palms of our hand. But such Swaraj has to be experienced by each one of us. One drowning man will never save another. Slaves ourselves, it would be a mere pretension to think of freeing others. It lies with us to bring about such a state of things. And here I'm trying to address scholars who are sort of doing research, teaching, consulting. In some sense, the metaphor suggests that we are all drowning people. We are drowning, and since we are drowning, we will never be in a position to save others. Till we ourselves kind of get out of this stage of drowning and find our strong footing, we'll not be able to save the others. And I have a very sort of a negative perception that scholarship in India continues to drown, and there's no way in which we will be able to save our society unless and until we kind of rescue ourselves first. So a brief thing on Eurocentric knowledge versus indigenous knowledge and pluriversality. So ever since Enlightenment, the dominant narrative of science and social science has been very, very Eurocentric. Of course, something that happened simultaneously with Enlightenment was colonialism, and it provided the military, political, and economic power to establish the dominant narrative about modernity. And of course, neocolonialism continues to sustain that notion of modernity. Of course, the European world is fascinated with modernity, but the non-European world, particularly the colonies, are also towing the European line of modernity, which, as we'll tell later, Gandhi was opposed to from the very beginning. And there's a need for us to go and seek out why Gandhi was opposed to modernity and capitalism and European civilization, and can we save our society by providing an alternative to the thinking that we have all accepted today. So the idea is there is one universal truth, and that is European. So European scholars were very clear that post-Enlightenment European society was the most evolved, and the rest of the world should emulate that. And I'm going to, in the next few slides, bring out some quotes from Macaulay, Marx, and Weber, who in some sense are very different in their worldviews, and yet all of them are consistent with the idea that Indian society and Indian knowledge needs to be destroyed and replaced with European societal thinking and European knowledge to achieve progress and what you might call modernity. So let me start with a clip from an extract from Macaulay's Minute of February 2nd, 1835. It seems to suggest that a single shelf of a good European library is worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. The intrinsic superiority of the Western literature is indeed fully admitted by those members of the committee who support the Oriental Plan of Education. The context is that within the British administration, there was a contest between Macaulay and friends who wanted to impose Western knowledge, and other people, including William Jones and all, who wanted an Oriental plan. What Macaulay is asserting here is even those people who wanted to have an Oriental plan of education in India accepted the superiority of Western knowledge. Another from the same minutes, another quote is that, maybe if you look at what is happening in India and the East and compare it to the literature and music, etc., and poetry in the West, there may be some element of comparison. But as soon as you pass into scientific knowledge, which is based on facts that are recorded and general principles investigated, it is very, very clear that European knowledge is so much superior to the knowledge that existed in India. That was the time when sort of backed by colonialism, India was being measured, studied through committees understanding language, committees trying to understand social structure, committees trying to understand the geographic structure. And on all fronts, it was felt that the European knowledge of India was so much superior to our own understanding of who we are and the land we occupy. Macaulay was very, very clear that European knowledge needs to be imposed on India. He makes a very sarcastic comment on Sanskrit literature. He says that all the books written in the Sanskrit language is less valuable than what may be found in the most paltry abridgments used at preparatory schools in England. I myself, I'm not very well versed with Sanskrit literature, but I find this statement terribly arrogant. And I'm sure that even at his time, Macaulay might have been in a minority, but his views seem to have prevailed in the British administration and continues to have an impact even today. Now, Karl Marx, one would think he would be very interested in liberating people, and he's also seen as anti-colonialist and anti-capitalist, but he was also very clear that Indian society had no history at all, at least no known history. And to the extent it was known as a passive society which was unresisting to external aggression and unchanging, and did not understand the notions of modernity and progress as understood by the West. And he kind of justifies the conquest of India. You can see the date he's writing in 1853. It's before the first war of independence. England is, or the Britain is increasing its footprint on India. And then he kind of agrees with it. And he says, we have a choice. Leave India and let it be conquered by the Turk or the Persian or the Russian, or should Britain or England take on this noble mission of destroying the old Asiatic society and replacing it with Western society, which is, of course, modern and progressive and all the nice things that Marx might want to say. Let's kind of, okay. Then we can move on to quotes from the introduction that Weber wrote to his book, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. He's so sure that in every branch of knowledge, Western knowledge is superior. Only in the West does science exist at the stage of development which we recognize today as valid. To the extent that he acknowledges there might be some bodies of knowledge, he says there are only fragments in Islamic society and fragments in some sects of Indian society which might have knowledge that is comparable to the West. He goes deeper and he says Indian geometry is not good enough because it lacks rational proof. If any of you have watched the movie on Ramanujam, you would realize that Ramanujam was a genius. He came up with so many theories. and yet the committee used to give him trouble because he did not believe in the idea or did not feel the need that a lot of his theorems had proved. But since the epistemology in the UK and Britain insisted that unless and until there's a rational proof, your geometry is useless, um, it was used to sort of push back on geometrical thought that would have existed in India. He talks about natural science, admits that there is natural science in India, but he says, oh, they lack the method of experiment. You go further, he says, yeah, they have medicine, but they lack anything with biological foundations. Essentially, what has happened is sort of, I'm using the quotes from Weber to suggest that the Europeans have decided that our methods, our metrics, our assessment tools are the best. And if any other body of knowledge does not match up to our epistemic methods, our research methodologies, or criteria for acceptance or rejection, it is not good enough. That's a huge problem. A huge problem for any knowledge that is from outside the West. And I claim that for a lot of Indic knowledge, this is very, very problematic. Um, like he thinks that even political thought is nowhere comparable to Aristotle. He admits that maybe there's issues of law and all in school of Mimamsa, but it's not as good as Roman law. And in a variety of ways in his introduction, Weber is emphasizing the reasons why even capitalism can only follow the Protestant ethic. And to the extent that has been admitted to have trade in China or India, whatever else it is, they're all deficient because the rules of the game that they follow are very different from what is followed in the West and in the Protestant world. You'll be surprised to know that a lot of the legislation that was imposed on India to change how business is conducted in India there would be a 4 or 5 year gap between legislation passed in the UK and then fresh legislation for the colony in India. So even as they were developing the so-called European ethos of running a business, it would be imposed on India very, very quickly. And most of Indian firms were forced to adapt to these new norms, which were in some sense institutionally incompatible with what they were used to in India. So the tragedy is that Indians in general and Indian scholars in particular have accepted the inferiority of Indian knowledge and the superiority of Eurocentric knowledge. And that's not just in Gandhian times, it seems to be prevalent today. And I believe that since the early 90s, it has only aggravated. Sort of around the time of independence and a little after, we continue to look up to the UK for our sort of wisdom. And in recent times, we are looking up to the US for our wisdom. And I think that's terribly, terribly unfortunate for scholars who are trying to create knowledge for and in India. That brings me to the section on decoloniality and pluriversality and why it is required in the social sciences. Now, I have emphasized social sciences here because I think at some level, the natural sciences do not suffer too much from coloniality. I kind of normally say that the atom in the US or UK behave the same as in India. So we need not have so-called Indian theories necessarily to understand natural phenomena. But in the social sciences, it's very important to give voice to the subaltern, give voice to the local, give voice to the subject who you are studying to really build theories. And that's why I'm emphasizing the need for decoloniality and pluriversality in the social sciences and not necessarily in the natural sciences or even in the pure sciences. Maths and stats, etc., need not be necessarily localized, although if it is possible to localize it, wonderful. So, as Mignolo puts it, the bottom line is that for the majority of Europeans, non-Europeans are lesser humans and are rationally deficient. And hence, knowledge making is the task of European thinkers. Now, as I said before, implicit thinking is, of course, this subaltern cannot speak for himself or herself, but they also cannot think. And it's the white man's burden to do the thinking for the brown man or the black man and take him towards progress. What I'm saying, basically, Minolo and Walsh suggest that there's a need for intellectual decolonization. We need to reduce the size of Western disciplinary apparatus and the institutions, including universities, museums, theological institutions that create and maintain the North Atlantic universal fictions. I mean, there's a whole infrastructure which is maintaining the idea that universal European knowledge or US knowledge today is universal, and the rest of the world should kind of accept it. But Milona and Voss essentially suggest that unless and until we break the apparatus or break the sort of dominance of this apparatus, all of us will be subject to this one universal epistemology, which is essentially Eurocentric, and we will fail. So we need to create a space where the Western apparatus is shrunk in size or reduced in power, which creates opportunities for other worldviews, other paradigms to survive, if not push back these dominant paradigms. Guha in his thing says the elite, particularly the English-speaking elite or the upper classes of Indian society, have collaborated with the colonizers, and he kind of says we collaborated sort of in return for a modicum of power and privilege that the British provided. And so, unfortunately for India, I think the elite, which was struggling for or did contribute to the independence of India, was significantly qualified, and you could colonized, and you could silence them or keep them quiet with this modicum of power and privilege that was given to them. And oftentimes, Raja Ram Mohan Roy is presented as a great reformer, but in my mind, he's one of those guys who kind of, from being a Sanskrit scholar and a great champion of Indian knowledge, he kind of succumbed to the powers there. The title of Raja, etc., was seemed to have been enough for him to start singing pains of the Western knowledge. Okay. And Guha suggests that this trend continues. I mean, because Guha's article is written in 1990, or the book is written in 1992. I claim that today's scholars too, it might be a grant from some foundation in the US, an opportunity to be a visiting scholar somewhere else. These seem to be enough for us to abandon our independent pursuit and become sort of continue the colonized legacy that has been sort of we have inherited and continue to sustain. In a recent article, Banerjee, Nigam, and Pandey kind of assessed the implication of this. And for Indian scholars, it has meant that we have stopped theorizing and we have stopped thinking. Okay? For him, the term theory appears as a ready-made body of philosophical thought produced in the West. The theory inclined among us simply pick up the latest off the shelf and apply it to a context, notwithstanding its provincial European origin. Our relationship to theory is dependent, derivative, and often deeply alienated. And I sort of much of my career in the Indian academia, I have seen my own thoughts. I mean, I'm not entirely not guilty of this, and I see my other colleagues. There is very little attempt to do anything original here. If we find a theory and a paradigm not working, not supporting, etc., again we go off to the next off-the-shelf theory that is come up in some American or European journal, and we start using Indian data to support it. I think it's time now to move on from that and really start thinking locally. As Nandi suggested, I mean, the West has been very good at sort of creating an image of itself and also creating anglicized, westernized others, such that the debates that happened about knowledge are all constrained within Western parts of knowledge. Nandi suggests that there is a need for the savage outsider, which includes us as Indians, to create a ground up understanding of the West and refuse to be players or counter players within the debates of the West. We need to go outside that on ontological and epistemological foundations that are fundamentally different from what the West follows. In his book, The Intimate Enemy, he kind of suggests that the West has been very good at producing servile imitators and admirers and even circus trained opponents. And I find the language he has used is pretty harsh, but at the same time, I find it it resonates with my observation of Indian scholars, that everything is done with explicit or implicit approval by the Caesars, who are the gatekeepers, editors, reviewers, conference organizers, whoever in the West. And because of that, I think Indian scholarship suffers unless and until we can create an alternative image of the West, an alternative image of ourselves. We will not be able to break out of this cage that we are all in. So now I'm going to Gandhi, who is the original decolonist and the pluriversalist. Minolo, in one of his books, he highlights Frantz Fanon and Gandhi as two early practitioners of decolonization or decoloniality and pluriversality. Of course, I'm going to focus here on Gandhi rather than Fanon. So you look at Gandhi, he's writing in 1909. Okay, that's the although I'm borrowing from the 1921 edition of Hind Swaraj, you have to notice that it was written in 1909. And he's essentially criticizing the Indian elite who is intoxicated by modern civilization. And he accepts that they're very smart people. He said, what we usually read are the work of defenders of modern civilization, which undoubtedly claim amongst its votaries very brilliant and even some very good men. Their writings hypnotize us. And so one by one, we are drawn into the vortex. So he's not questioning the intelligence of the people who are promoting modern civilization in India. What he's looking at is the fact that they are their minds are colonized. They don't have complete Swaraj. They are constrained by the European thinking that they have learned to accept and see as superior to anything local, anything Indic. He's basically saying that don't let the people who are already colonized define what the progress is. And if you look at India today, I mean, GDP, earnings per capita, and all these kind of metrics are used, and we have accepted. Or for example, in medical circles, if you can see the number of doctors per the population, this is used, and all this seems to suggest that we are lacking, and we need to catch up to the West. That's problematic, and for people teaching in business schools, these accreditation processes and the ranking processes are all tools of enslavement. We are all willingly participating in these rankings. We are willingly participating in this accreditation process. And step by step, rather than break away from the colonization, we are willingly and enthusiastically becoming part of it. We want to become better at the rankings controlled by the West. And in the process, after some time, we'll all be robots doing exactly what the Caesars in the West want us to do, which Gandhi stated in 1909, and I'm stating now is very, very problematic. In one of his speeches in Banaras Hindu University, he kind of talks about the local language vernacular, and he's kind of ashamed to be addressing the people in Banaras Hindu University in the English language. And he hopes that in the future, whenever he comes, he will be able to address his people in a native language rather than any language like English. In the same speech, he kind of says that, if in the last 50 years, okay, this is not, okay, the book I'm referring to is published in 2024, but this is from the same speech in 2016. He says, if in the last 50 years, rather than obtain macularized education, we had obtained local language in the vernacular, we should have had educated people, not as if they were foreigners in their own land, but speaking to the heart of the nation, which is, again, resonates with me. And I'm also partially guilty of that. The educated, particularly the one educated in the English language, so-called convent educated, we have removed ourselves from the masses. We have excluded ourselves from the market, and we kind of refer to what we will call Bharat as the other. And we are fascinated with this idea of India. To Gandhi's strength, he recognized this in 1916, and he wanted the educated to be much more indigenous and more connected with the world they live in. But unfortunately, a lot of us are more connected with the West than with our own country. So Gandhi was not a guy who wanted to close the door. He did not want to throw out the West like Japan had done, or significantly resist the West as China had done. But while he was open to influences, kind of says, I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. And I think that's the attitude we should have as scholars in a globalized world, where trying to block out the rest of the world is impossible. And yet, what we can do is make sure that even as we are influenced by all the external influences, we refuse to be blown off our feet. We continue to be rooted in paradigms, in research, in practices that make sense for our context. So, Gandhi's thinking is based on this idea of Anekantwada and Syadvad from Jain philosophy. And in one of his quotes in 1926 in Young India, he says, it has been my experience that I'm always true from my point of view and often wrong from the point of view of my honest critics. And he can use the metaphor of 7 blind men who gave 7 different descriptions of the elephant, from where all were right in their respective points of view and wrong from the point of view of one another, and right and wrong from the point of view of the man who knew the elephant. And kind of this is how it is depicted in one of the murals in a Jain temple. I think unless and until we accept this metaphor powerfully, much of what I say will be meaningless. As soon as we believe that the European amongst us who's touching one part of the elephant knows the entire elephant, and hence we should keep quiet, this metaphor is meaningless. What this metaphor is essentially saying is your point of view is valid. It might be incomplete, it might be missing out on something, but you should have the courage to think along the lines based on your true experiences. You should be able to theorize based on your true experiences and not just accept something from Europe, which is actually touching one part of the elephant as truth and succumb to that truth, which is, again, I'm alleging is what is happening in Indian academia. So in sort of 1947, just immediately after the independence and a few years before his death, Gandhi kind of wrote that he seemed to have achieved political freedom, but the subtle influences of foreign language and foreign thought continue. And I kind of believe that that's hasn't changed. We are sitting in 2025, and subtle influences of foreign language and foreign thought continue. Ironically, even my criticism to a larger audience in India is still using a foreign language and is still using a lot of the framing and the concepts on foreign thought. So it's a long journey for us before we can push back the foreign language and foreign thought in terms of how we think. Now, this is an article I kind of picked up. Don Moraes, who was a very prominent journalist, he's written a paper that 10 years after Gandhi, and he kind of quotes Nehru. He says, do you think about Gandhi? He kind of says, yeah, I think about Gandhi, but for different reasons. His ability to recapture his serenity of mind, the calmness and the spirit, and etc., etc. I really admire Gandhi and remember him for that. But do you think I actually asked what would Gandhi have done in this situation so that I would use that information to guide my behavior? And he says, well, no. So Moraes, in his own words, says many of his and Gandhi's ideas appeared to the younger man, that is Nehru, to be medieval and revivalist. Nehru recoiled from Mahatma's idealization of poverty and suffering, his doctrine of wealth as a trust, and his frequent thrusts on religion and spiritual aspects of the civil disobedience movement. His attitude to machinery and modern civilization, and his vagueness in defining political and economic objectives. Quite clearly, in Moraes' assessment, Nehru had moved on from Gandhian thought 10 years after Gandhi's death. And in some sense, one could use the language of colonized mind and decolonized mind. And Nehru was definitely mind was more colonized than Gandhi. And 10 years was sufficient for him to kind of have discarded or rejected all the Gandhian thought that he might have accepted or believed in when Gandhi was still around. So with that background on decolonization and need for pluriversality, let me get into today's focus, which is kind of why trusteeship. So in the last article that Ghoshal wrote, Sumanta Ghoshal wrote, and actually it was completed after his death, he kind of questioned a lot of mainstream management research and education. And he kind of attributed a lot of the ethical problems in US management to theories taught in business schools. And he used the word ideologically inspired amoral theories collectively contribute to a self-fulfilling prophecy that encourages leaders to lose any sense of morality. Essentially, capitalist class in general and the kind of shareholders and the shareholder market pressures all contribute to management practices lacking any morality, and the captains of the industry having a sense of morality. That's what Ghoshal thought. And of course, I'm quoting him because I think I significantly agree with that. Of course, Ghoshal's assessment, he says, this need to become scientific in our approach and discover causal patterns and laws. And to the extent that anything that doesn't follow these so-called scientific causal patterns and laws, we neglect them. And he attributes the lack of attention to ethics and morality and all in management to some of these so-called soft issues not lending themselves very well to the mathematical models and the causal patterns that currently is celebrated in management education. So he kind of says the dominant theories in management tell us to fight with each other, whether it's leaders are seen as people who will kind of cheat the rest. So you need to use agency theory to set up control systems, or you need to have transaction cost theory to make sure there's avoidance of opportunity. Porter's framework, he says, Porter is not only telling us to compete with our competition, but it's also telling us that you should compete with the suppliers, customers, employees, and regulators. And within an organization, team members are encouraged to kind of compete with their peers, etc., etc. So essentially, in Ghoshal's terms, all these theories implicitly have made each one of us, whether as individuals or as collective, antagonistic with each other, rather than cooperate and collaborate and create value for everyone, we are only interested in ourselves. And in the process, if the capitalist system has set up reward systems to maximize shareholder value, we are all maximizing shareholder value and our personal value at the cost of all others. So, I mean, this is taking Michael Porter and Kramer's quote from a Harvard Business Review article. These are people who have championed capitalism to the best, and yet they are worried that capitalism as it is functioning is kind of flawed. The former CEO of TCS, kind of looking at the assessment, not just in the world, but particularly in India, he says we should kind of reflect, and it's important for us to stop and think, what is this wealth for? And a lot of us who are living in India have seen a lot of material growth since so-called the markets were liberalized in the early 1900s. But it's kind of we have to stop and reflect what are the consequences on society. There are different opinions on this. I kind of feel that if we reflect nicely, we can probably avoid much of the negative that we see, and that's the context in which Ramudarai suggested that we should look at Gandhi's trusteeship. Of course, in his article, he seems to suggest that the Tata Group seems to come closest to following the principles of trusteeship that Gandhi suggested. So I kind of, building on what Ramudarai says, that as in Indian society, for the first 50 years of our sort of post-independent period, we followed largely what we will call leftist thinking or social thinking. And then since liberalization, we are looking at capitalist thinking. Some of us are happy with where we are. A lot of us are not happy with what we are. And there are already signs of people wanting us to go back to socialist thinking. Personally, my view, and which is I'm trying to promote here, is this is a good time for us to start thinking independently. Sort of capitalism focuses on creating wealth while neglecting its fair distribution, and socialism prioritizes fair distribution without thinking enough about wealth creation. And so trusteeship is the possibility of arriving at our goals better than is currently being followed. So, what is Gandhi's trusteeship? Okay. He starts questioning. Gandhi actually questions civilization that is focused on material wealth. And again, in Hind Swaraj, he kind of says just having better houses and better bodily happiness is not civilization. We should be concerned with a civilization that lacks spirituality and morality in its thinking. Capitalism as practice is immoral. Gandhi kind of thought that it's almost like thieving. Nature seems to produce enough for everyone. If only we were careful in consuming how much is suitable for us. And ironically, we look at today, what Gandhi found in sort of 1909 is observed today. The haves have lots and much more than they need, and the have-nots have very little. And unless and until we get our act together, I think these issues will not be solved, and we'll be worse off if real social tensions take more violent outcomes. Kind of Gandhi was opposed to technology that makes just the rich richer without making everyone better off. And so oftentimes Gandhi is painted as a person who was against technology. He's not actually against technology. He kind of used two examples. He says, I use my hand, and underlying my hand is there's a bone technology. So I don't reject technology. Second example, he says, I wear my glasses. I know it is technology, but technology is helping me. It is not disempowering me, and I'll support that technology. any technology that disempowers human beings was problematic. And so he did not like any machinery that just made the capitalists richer and the labor poorer. He was very much inclined to use, uh, and the charkha he kind of used was symbolic of the fact that the charkha made the life of the laborer better without taking away his dignity, whereas the machines from Manchester kind of took away the dignity from labor. So he needed he promoted technology which was supportive for all. Value can be created by the cooperation of all. He essentially means it is possible for us to think about each other without competing with each other, unlike modern management thought or modern economic thought. Transition is possible without revolution. So he was against, of course, he's writing in the context where they were talking about a Marxist revolution, or they're talking about a strong government that deals with equality and fairness. And he was opposed to both. He didn't want the revolution because it was violent, and he wanted non-violence. But he also thought that the state was a very soulless machine, and so he would have liked persuasion to get the rich to care for the poor. So in summary, what Gandhi's 6 principles were, that that you can transform the capitalist society into an egalitarian world when they accept that property doesn't belong to individuals or families, it belongs to society, and the individuals or families are only trustees of that wealth on behalf of larger society. It does not recognize private ownership, and it's open to the use of state legislation to kind of allow for certain wealth creation and distribution. It also kind of looks down on selfish satisfaction, that sort of vulgar consumption that disregards the uh, interests of society. It is open to the idea of having a minimum living wage and a maximum income. You might say there are elements of socialism coming in there, but his belief is it can be done without violence and coercion. And there's kind of social necessity and not personal gain should be uh, the basis of all economic decisions. Can it be realized? A lot of you think that trusteeship is cannot be realized, and Gandhi was very much aware of that. And he says, no. People thought even non-violence was difficult to achieve, and so we've demonstrated that it is feasible to use non-violence as a means of opposition. So similarly, he thinks that trusteeship, given an opportunity, will sort of achieve its end. And he also kind of said that it's the trusteeship, that the way he articulated it may be an abstraction, just like Euclid's geometry. But he feels that if we come anywhere close to what the concept of trusteeship would be, the society would be better. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm open to questions if there are questions, comments. I'm sorry I took a little longer than I planned, but.
So those who have question can raise your hands, and then maybe we can go for questions. Yes, Jagdish sir, yes.
Hi, good afternoon, and Professor Ojha, thank you so much.
Good afternoon.
This is such a rich conversation as I hear it from within the precincts of SPJIMR, because that's a language that we have at least tried to speak for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you, all said and done, there has been a lot of noise from smaller groups on rediscovering Gandhi and bringing Gandhi right into management institutes, at least opening a conversation on ideas of sustainability or nonviolence seen through Gandhi's lens, and they haven't got very far.
Yeah.
What is it that you think should be done? Like in our own institute, I was with Dr. Srikant, the late Dr. M.L. Srikant, when we visited Gujarat Vidyapith. and had a full-fledged seminar on how we could integrate Gandhian thinking into management thinking. That didn't happen. Later, I went on to write a full-fledged, began a series of books on conversations with people who speak the Gandhian language, but it's still not entering core mainstream business schools. How do you, what do you see as a road ahead where this can be? Because the gap between CEO pay and average pay is very high, even in India today. Like it or no, India is mimicking all the ills of the West.
Yeah.
Without really taking the positives of the West, which are also many. And so this is a double whammy, and business schools are guilty. So I wonder how you and I, both in a business school, reflect on this.
Okay, I can tell you, I will talk more about the IIMs because I understand the system better, and more particularly about IIM Bangalore. The whole ecosystem, the US-driven or Euro-driven infrastructure that promotes a particular kind of scholarship is well entrenched in our system. And so where do you publish? You publish in an American journal. How do you get promoted? You get promoted, you publish in an American journal. Who do we seem to hire in terms of people who have good sort of research skills, etc., mostly American trained. So it's very difficult after your whole system is embedded in celebrating Western thought, then getting them to integrate Gandhi or integrate something else. It's very, very difficult. Students also, unfortunately, in an elective, you can bring in Gandhi a little bit here and there, but if you make it more mainstream, so the whole ecosystem is problematic. And my job, I think your job would be to kind of not lose heart and keep sort of saying these things and keeping that thought alive, so that someday when there is enough momentum and enough of a network of people talking the same thing, that change will happen. I don't see that change happening immediately, but yet I don't want to be disheartened and kind of keep quiet.
Sure. Of course, I appreciate. Thank you so much, Professor Ojha, and I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Bonajit, you forgot. Professor Ojha wanted me to ask a lot of questions.
Of course. So, yeah.
So, fairly complex presentation in terms of what all you are saying. And the route to Gandhi's trusteeship meanders through many other things. So I have some observations, comments on the first part, and then actually some ideas on the second.
Sure.
First part, actually, the way I see it, that there is a kind of growth model the country has, which is Western oriented, consumerist kind of oriented, and so on and so forth. And in that situation, even this decolonization, saying we are going back in terms of ideas and so on, and given that you have also been fond of conspiracy theories, how do we not know that even critical theory is perpetrated by the West itself?
No, we know that
for its own kind of purposes.
Yeah. So
is how we, please.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. When you finish, then I'll respond.
So more in terms of conversations. So you can say whatever you want to say. I have no, you can say your bit, and then I'll come back.
Yeah. So even sort of Minolo says basically capitalism and Marxism are two sides of the same coin. They have accepted material growth as the ultimate goal, and they just differ on the means. And so they are kind of playing the same game. And Gandhi was very conscious that that is not civilization, and civilization cannot be limited just to the material wealth. There's more to it, and he definitely drew on a lot of Indic thinking. Now, if you see reviews of Gandhi, everyone would say, okay, he was affected by Tolstoy, he was affected by his um, um, people he met in England. His whole concept of trustee was taken from the recent trustee law that had been passed in Britain. Of course, he had those influences, but the fact that he was drawing intellectually from his own upbringing, from Gujarati society, Gujarati business community thinking, from his religious moorings, both as a Vaishnav and as a person exposed to Jain thinking, that's marginalized. So what even Gandhian thought gets packaged as Western thought, which again he is influenced by Western thought, but unless and until we can think that some Indian intellectual can think originally without necessarily borrowing constructs and language from the West, I think we have no future as scholars in India.
So, I mean, one can have issues there. Why this kind of obsessive kind of compulsion for purity in terms of thought? And that itself, I would say maybe people like you should examine. But what I would like to point out that this whole notion of Indic, if we replace it with something like indigenous, and you quoted two, chaps which Minoli asks us to look at, Gandhi and Paul Freire. Now, Freire's experience was also a kind of decolonization.
Yeah.
What has happened that in India today, in the nationalist turn, actually, there is the whole, I would say it has happened to other societies. It is happening to other societies that there is a notion of a golden past.
Yeah.
And there is a loss of that paradise, and there is a yearning to go back to that paradise.
Yeah.
Now, in that sense, this whole Indic business right now, there are multiple strands of thought which are getting coalesced.
Yeah.
And because, say, for example, for you, would you say that UPI is not Indic? Because
No,
it's a great thing, which has happened to India. So this whole obsession with going back to pasts
no.
Collective kind of, selective kind of texts in the past. Because we haven't yet talked about the politics of Indic. So there is, if we go back to Foucault and say that there is a kind of, institutional kind of mechanism which is giving rise to this. Like you said, there is an institutional mechanism of AOM and so on. So there is also an institutional mechanism at India level which is getting into these.
Agree. Fully agree with you on that. Fully agree with you.
That is a separate issue. I'm just pointing out that maybe we should differentiate between different strands of indigeneity.
Absolutely.
And this is the time when indigeneity gets interpreted in multiple ways.
Absolutely.
All those ways may not be compatible with each other.
Absolutely.
The second one, I more of had an observation, which is that when we talk about Gandhi's idea of trusteeship, we can't divorce it from Gandhi's ethics of consumption.
Yeah.
Now, you have a society where the leaders of society get known by how costly their sunglasses are, how costly their suits are. Okay.
Yeah.
In such a society, how do you think we'll actually go back to the idea of trusteeship? Okay. And more empirically, actually, there is the work of J.C. Kumarappa and so on.
Yeah.
Eminent Gandhian who kind of looked at the Gandhian economic experiments based on trusteeship and based on his ideas. So I would think that any future work would perhaps also engage with Kumarappa's work and kind of, even Sarvodaya kind of, experiments which happen.
I mean, if you read about, I read about Kumarappa very, very recently. He is this CA accountant coming in here. I forget, he had a Cornelius or whatever, is a Christian faith, Christian name. He fully transformed to become a Gandhian. Now, maybe he's sort of made too much of a transformation. But if you make part of the transformation that Kumarappa made, I think our society will be better off. Is it going to happen tomorrow? I don't think so. So the transformation that Dr. Kumarappa made, I think, was fantastic. Would I want everyone to make that transition? I don't think it is feasible in the short run, but enough of us have to celebrate Dr. Kumarappa as a person who had US educated. He had his moorings were Western in the sense, sort of Christian faith, etc., etc., and he made this transformation too. And I think we should try to do that again without demonizing the West or demonizing some people who continue to think like the West. But I would think change is important.
Yeah. Mr. Ramaya, you have a question? Yeah.
I was just trying to understand more about that concept of trusteeship as an alternative to capitalistic models. How does this model deal with issues of free ridership?
I mean, it's for Gandhi, free ridership is impossible. He expects ethics from the capitalist. He also expects ethics from the so-called have-nots. So it's a very difficult model to follow. He doesn't believe. In fact, there are cases in which he has gone and settled some strikes in some cotton mills. I forget, in Gujarat or Maharashtra, whatever else it is, and trade union leaders have been very upset with that because they thought that he was favoring the capitalist and he was kind of a pawn in the hands of the capitalist. As far as Gandhi was concerned, he wanted the capitalists to understand that there's no free riding. These guys need to be given a fair living. And on the other side, he used to convince the workers that the capitalist is actually doing something that they cannot do. And if they cooperate collectively, all of us will be better. Okay. So maybe he was too much of an idealist to think that free riding will not happen. And he believed in the goodwill of the capitalist. He also believed in the goodwill of labor, that they will all cooperate and work together to make all of us better. But at the time when we are talking about it, the capitalist is trying to marginalize the labor, implement technology such that labor is kind of antagonistic to capital, and the labor has accepted that role. And then when it comes down to sort of, just like the capitalist wants to make a lot of money without making enough investments, similar, the labor also adopts the practice of trying to make as much money by putting in the least effort. And so unless and until we see ourselves as cooperative human beings working together for the collective good, free riding will happen from the labor, and in some sense, free riding will happen in the capitalist also. Half the capitalists don't know why they are making money. They've just invested in the right place. Okay. So I think maybe Gandhi was a little naive. He thought that you could appeal to the goodness of everyone so that they will work for the collective good.
Yeah, I think my thoughts were more on the lines of both free ridership and opportunistic behavior. So basically, if it presupposes a very strong ethics on the part of the individual actor, that is one challenge that we are finding in all the MBA courses. The ethics courses. Even the attendance and credits and all those things have become so problematic.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, see, we are teaching here. Sumantra Ghoshal was teaching in London Business School and then some other places. He finding the same thing, and he was attributing it to, if you think agency theory works or transaction cost theory works, the assumption about a human being is not nice in those theories. They are essentially cheats. Given an opportunity, we will cheat. That's the kind of default assumption of what a human being is. The fact that trust plays a role, the fact that the goodness of human being plays a role, the fact that altruism plays a role is neglected. And over time, that's the education we are giving our MBA students. And so we are all antagonistic to each other, competing with the competition, bullying our suppliers, we are bullying our distributors, we are bullying our subordinates. I mean, it's just, I think, again, you can keep claiming that Gandhi might be a little naive, but he definitely had more faith in the goodness of human beings than, some of us have. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I also wanted to thank Professor Jha for bringing up this thought about multiple strands of indigeneity.
Yeah.
Looking forward to having some further discussion on that one.
Is
Multiple sets of institutions, bringing in.
So if once we win the battle with the West, we will have to sort out the infrastructure within the country, and Ramya and I, we've written about this one with G.N. Devi Tick's talking about that there seems to be an overemphasis on texts in Sanskrit, and he claims that a lot of the vernacular, and particularly since he works in the area of Gujarat and Maharashtra, and he says there's lots of Indic knowledge in those traditions and expressed in those languages. And while sort of Sanskrit or Sanskrit text seems to be hogging a lot of attention, there are other bodies of knowledge that also should pay attention. And I have no problems agreeing with that. I mean, just Vidyanand would be able to relate to it, and others. I mean, if you ask me my mother tongue, I'm a Bhojpuri speaker, and I would like to believe that there is some wisdom in old Bhojpuri texts, etc., which gets delegitimated today because I'm told by the so-called folks that, I'm a Hindi speaker, and Hindi is my first language. And I would like to believe that Bhojpuri is my first language and Hindi is only my second language. And okay, so once we win the fight with the West, we can kind of try to see how the infrastructure within the country is more liberating and allows diverse strands of thought drawing on diverse traditions.
Very quickly, if I may, I mean, I teach ethics at SPJMR in Mumbai, and it has been my observation that while it is true that on the surface students come across as instrumental and in fact join a B school by calculating ROI, you tap the surface a little and you will find the inherent desire to want to be ethical. It is not that they don't want to be, it is that the system that we have given them, they can see no way other than that. And there is a lovely IIM Bangalore survey on how students relate to ethics, which I have actually quoted in a book chapter written by Springer, teaching ethics to MBA students in a growth-obsessed India. Because many of these students have actually paid bribes somewhere in their lives doing some small transactions with society. And it's not that they want to do things the wrong way. It is they feel that this is the way the system works, for which I think we have to look within more at ourselves, then point to them. Given the right atmosphere and conditions and their support, I think they all want to be ethical, but they see no go with that. I think that's a bigger problem. Yeah.
Again, I agree with you, and yet I don't feel fully confident that we are small pawns in the larger system. Business schools, we can make a difference, and we should continue to try to make the difference. But hoping or claiming that we are going to make the big difference, I mean, I'm not that optimistic. The whole system, I think it's a long journey. We have to continue to trudge the line of ethics and morality, and hope that over time, if all of us do it, it will come there. Because when I talk about these issues in class, he says, sir, come to reality. If I don't do this cheating, the competition will do it. So I'm forced to do it. And so actually the competition is saying the same thing about these guys. So all of us are trying to protect each other, and sort of, the attitude is minimizing our losses rather than maximizing our gains.
True.
And that's what it is. So I'm sounding a little pessimistic, but I would still think that we should continue getting the message there, so that
True. I would agree, Professor Jha, that B schools are small players and they may not be able to make a larger impact. But I do sometimes suspect that they can make a very large impact on the negative side, if not on the positive side. That's a problem, I think.
Yeah. So if we don't do what we are doing, I mean, that's what Sumantro Ghoshal's articles are, that, kind of he's a lot of the financial fiascos and all that have happened in the US economy,
Correct.
there are MBAs right at the top there.
Correct. In fact, one of the articles I quoted in that chapter was close down the business school. We may be going too far now.
Yeah, it's possible.
So, sir, I would like to ask a question on your first part of your presentation. You mentioned that there is a inferiority among students or even others, practitioners, that Indian knowledge is not superior and Eurocentric knowledge is superior. So what may be the reason behind it and how can we actually counter this thing?
See, reason behind it is if we look at sort of during a colonized period, who has made progress? And the guy who speaks in English and the guy who's gone to some of the elite schools, whether they have the true capability or not. I mean, so I can put myself. I mean, I'm a very late sort of criticizer of the system, but I'm ironically also a beneficiary of the system. So it's middle class India's passion to get their children into so-called convent education. Now you ask those parents whether they are thinking right when they're doing that. It seems very logical that all the skills the so-called convent educated schools provide is essential for our society. That's the evidence. So they put us there. One step of colonization happens there. Then we go to these elite institutions, some funded by the US, some funded by the UK, some funded by whatever. And creepingly, none of them are actually consciously trying to damage us, but just the system. At the end of it, you have a product which is significantly colonized. And I am guilty of that. Then late in the career, one realizes that, because, Vidyanand talked about it. I used to talk a lot about critical theory and postmodernism, etc., etc. And that's how I realized now I was debating capitalism and critical theory and postmodernism are all within sort of Eurocentric thinking. Till in the last 8-9 years, we've got exposed to this decolonial thinking and the possibilities that there might be worldviews, thought processes outside the West that might contribute to getting us out of the mess that we are in. So I continue to be optimistic, except that I don't think that this transformation will happen overnight.
Yes. So if there are, so are there any more questions? Yeah. So, okay. So it was a rich discussion on a lot of things, I would say, starting from how little bit of colonialism and then the Gandhian model, the two part that I could see. And so we are very thankful to all the participants and Professor Ojha sir for giving his time and sharing his knowledge. And so we continue to kind of conduct these sessions over time. So definitely we'll welcome you for the next session. So once again, thank you, Professor Ojha. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And it was a pleasure speaking. And hopefully some of this will affect the thinking of the listeners in the future. Thank you. Good luck. Thank you. Good luck.